You're listening to the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, your host, Ben Eagle. Please remember to subscribe to the show wherever you are listening. Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 183 of the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, Ben Eagle. Now, today we are heading down to West Sussex to meet the man who, in my experience, everyone seems to know anyway. So he probably doesn't need much of an introduction, but I'm going to give him one anyway. It's Russ Carrington. Russ, very helpfully, provides a full bio on his LinkedIn page, which is always very helpful for podcast hosts who are looking for information on guests. But it was very thorough. And I've been able to pick out a few other things, but he's currently the manager of NEP Regenerative Farms. Many of you will know of NEP as the spiritual home of UK Rewilding, but the farm side of the business that Russ has been managing, that consists of beef, poultry and market gardening. And Russ was sort of involved in the process of that as well, so we'll talk about that. But he also has a fascinating backstory to this point. He grew up on his family's farm in Herefordshire and went to Cardiff University for a degree in civil engineering. Then, after a few years of working as an engineer, Russ turned to farming and helped to manage an 800-acre mixed farm in Herefordshire for 2 years before taking the opportunity to become executive secretary for the Pasture-Fed Livestock Association. He's also involved in the early days of that, so we'll talk about that as well. He was with them for 8 years, 3 of which were as general manager. He was active with Young Farmers for many years, and he's a former chair of the Agri Steering Group at Young Farmers. For 2 years, he was the chair of Rural Youth Europe. He's currently still a steering committee member of Jane Craigie's Rural Youth Project. He also started a trend. You're sensing a trend here that he's a very busy guy. He's done a lot of stuff. He also started a transition farming movement in Herefordshire, which I'd love to hear more about today. Yeah, and he's generally a big fan of the outdoors. And he tells me that he enjoys gardening, cider making, hiking, and travel to give him inspiration. And he's actually about to head off this year on a magical mystery tour of travel as well. I'm massively with him when it comes to travel and inspiration. Russ, I'm going to stop talking now. Welcome to Meet the Farmers. How is your week going? You're in the process of moving, actually, which we might get onto.
Yeah, hi Ben. Yeah, week's going great, and we've got some lovely cold weather at the moment. I just love these winter crisp mornings. It really makes you appreciate the outdoors and staying connected with what we're doing on the land.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about NEP first of all, because, like I said during the intro, a lot of listeners will have heard about it for, of course, Rewilding, but you, of course, have one of the best insights into it. So I'd love to hear more today. You've been managing the farm side for a couple of years now, must be. Yeah. And so a lot of people might just think that NEP equals rewilding and not farming. So tell us about the regenerative farm side of NEP, how it came about in the first place, especially with you, and how it fits within the wider NEP project.
Yeah, so NEP comprises about 3,500 acres, of which 3,000 have been rewilded, and that process was started just over 20 years ago now, and it's a fascinating project in the way that nature has recolonized the land that they've left, and they've reintroduced free roaming herbivores, and it's created this really interesting dynamic with nature, with grazing animals. And lots of studies are understanding how those grazing herbivores are essential to supporting bird life and insect life and many other things as well. The owners, and Isabella Tree in particular, has written a book about the project and over 20 years what's happened. Book's called Wilding, and it's become a real bestseller, and it's generated a lot of interest. And as you say, NEP has become very well known. But it's essentially a really big experiment on 3,000 acres to see what nature can do, and there's lots of learnings all the time. But it's often been criticized, and rewilding is sometimes criticized for using up land that could otherwise be used for producing food.
Yeah.
I suppose the owners of NEP, the family, have never said this is something that everybody has to do. It's about saying, well, this is really interesting, and what a great demonstration is for how we address the biodiversity crisis. And wouldn't it be great if there are other sites that can do rewilding on marginal land or land that's difficult to farm, to provide nature a bit more of a home and more of a stronghold to help it to survive. But there's another 500 acres to the estate, some of which is tenanted. That bit of land wasn't rewilded because it wasn't really practical to do so. It's separated by roads from the rest of the rewilding. It's around.
Yeah, I think I remember that bit actually when I visited.
Yeah. It's quite separate, and it's different. It's been originally, it was managed in a similar way, but it's for the last 20 years it hasn't been. Some of it had been tenanted, some of it had been grazed periodically by some of the breeding animals coming in and out of the rewilding, and some of it hadn't been really managed much at all. So in 2020, during the kind of height of COVID, NEP approached me and said, we've got an idea about making this other bit of land into not rewilding, but into a regenerative farm, to actually demonstrate how regenerative farming can work alongside rewilding and try and address some of those concerns that people have around rewilding using up good land that could be used for food production, but actually to say, well, rewilding can happen alongside food production as part of a mixed fabric landscape, where it's really good to have different farming methods, different land management methods right across the landscape. And so I spent the best part of 6 months developing that concept with them. And I felt that it had some real viability, and it was potentially a really exciting project. And then they said, well, would you like to run it, set it up, and make it happen? Which I thought about for a little bit, because it wasn't what I'd imagined doing next in my career. But I thought, well, what an amazing opportunity to be able to put into practice what I'd been preaching for a few years, and to learn more about rewilding and understand a bit more about how we can farm in tune with nature.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's strange that life sometimes gives you those tangents, doesn't it? And actually, you never know what's going to come out as a result of it, and the lessons that you'll learn along the way as well.
Exactly, yeah.
So take us through some of the enterprises and also the people who are involved.
So essentially, the heavy clay soils here really lend themselves to growing grass, and so I felt that grass-based enterprises were the most suitable, predominantly for the farm. And so we set about creating a beef herd, and I went out and found cattle to form a foundation herd, brought them to the farm, started mob grazing in 2021. Mob grazing being the rotation of animals moving around tall grass, trampling some, eating some, and leaving some to regrow, which is another big topic to get into, but something I'd been advocating for a while and put into practice quite quickly where we could, because a lot of the farm was quite dilapidated, no running water, fences, fence lines a little bit hit and miss, and so a lot of work to kind of establish that infrastructure, which I realized we'd need help to do. So we secured a countryside stewardship mid-tier agreement to help make that happen. That's still being rolled out as we speak, and so we're still growing the farm. We're only grazing about 50% of that land so far. And as we get more fencing done, we can get more grazing done in other areas. And interestingly, the fencing we're doing is essentially to establish a ring fence, and we're removing old dilapidated fence lines within fields, because we're wanting our hedgerows to be really dynamic places for nature, where there are not sort of solid straight lines of fencing, but we can use our polywire electric fencing or our no fence GPS collars to actually manage that edge habitat, which is a really important aspect of what we're trying to do here and connect the rewilding across the landscape. We spent probably the best part of 2021 trying to understand how we were going to create a market garden. And I suppose one bit of information I've missed actually is that NEP are in the process of building a farm shop and cafe, which is partly to kind of cope with the increasing number of visitors that are coming to NEP, want to come and see and understand what's going on, and want to buy produce from the estate and want to eat produce from the estate. And so there's this it's quite a long-term project going on to create that facility. And so part of this regenerative farming project was to say, right, well, wouldn't it be great to produce as much of our own food that we then sell in that farm shop and cafe? So that's, that whole supply chain was something I've been tasked with. And so the market garden was an important aspect of that, because we wanted people to arrive at the farm shop, drive past a flourishing market garden as they drive in, and see the produce that they're going to be served and buying. We felt that would be an important aspect of transparency, food miles, and demonstrating just what was possible. And so we had this bit of land that was a compacted 2-acre horse paddock that became available, and we felt was the right site for it. The soil wasn't too bad. It was some of the lighter soil on the estate, which is still quite heavy clay. And I set about trying to find some growers, or a grower, to help us make that a reality. And I met some really fascinating people, and I found that social media was a really good way of connecting with those people. We found an amazing couple who were managing a market garden just outside Copenhagen.
Okay.
Rosanna and Sina, and they came and started February 2022, and they have literally turned this knackered old horse paddock into a thriving vegetable.
They've done all that in that time, because I've seen the photographs. That is impressive. Yeah.
So a combination of kind of no dig beds, trying to kind of explore that as a concept, which and quickly to explain no dig beds, it's about you cultivate the land in year one, and you kind of build these beds that's 75 centimeters wide, and then each year, rather than re-rotivate or recultivate those beds, you just apply a top dressing of mulch, of compost, and you seed directly into that. So you're not, after year one, you're not churning the soil again, and you're kind of hopefully settling into a decent rich soil structure, and you're managing your vegetables growing into that mulch and green manures as well when you're not growing vegetables. And it's been really fascinating. We produced 4 tons of vegetables.
Wow.
With that little space. It's a 2-acre paddock, but there's kind of amenity space around the edges. And in fact, the actual growing beds are only equate to about an acre. So it's a phenomenal amount of food, and it's really demonstrated to me, actually, we can worry about productivity per acre or per hectare, but if we really want to be feeding humans, then growing vegetables is one of the best ways. But it's very labor intensive, and that's it's a big cost. That enterprise is the labor costs, and making it stack up financially is a challenge.
Yeah. So obviously there's the two sides at NEP on the estate. You've got the Rewilding project, you've got the regenerative farm. But I mean, is there any crossover between both? And I suppose on a broader level as well, do you see sort of connection between Rewilding and regenerative in any way?
Well, that's exactly what we've been trying to understand. And actually, pieces of land that the only thing that separates them is essentially a road and grassy verges and hedgerows and fences. And so how can we enable nature to permeate through the landscape? With an example like that, we've got known populations of some rare species within the rewilding that are being studied, but they're not on the regenerative farm. And so why is that? And what can we do with those areas and those zones where the different land management types are abutting one another? And what we've found is that, so we've done a lot of design thinking in that, or I have to think about how might nature move and different species move. And we're not talking about kind of big species like deer or beavers or anything. It's about kind of insects, birds, bats, and owls and things that might come and colonize the regenerative farm. They might come and feed there and then fly back to roost in the rewilding, say, or even vice versa. And things like dung beetles we felt were quite a key indicator of that success. And we actually measured dung beetle levels on the regenerative farm before the cattle arrived, and there was very little. And I think there were 1 or 2 species that kind of cropped up. But once we'd introduced the cattle there and we got their diets right, so the dung was right, it was I was incredibly amazed that the dung beetles were arriving from the rewilding within 24 hours. They were sniffing out the dung and traveling over, which is kind of really reassuring that certain species are able to do that.
Yeah. So taking all this together, really, what does the future look like for the regenerative farm? You obviously mentioned the farm shop as part of the overall plan and how that perhaps integrates into that. But what does the future look like, and also what does your future look like?
I spent the last 2 years really putting the foundations in place for the farm. The other thing we haven't mentioned is pasture poultry.
Oh yeah, of course.
Poultry kind of running behind the grazing cattle, and that's been really fascinating. I sort of piloted that during 2022. That'll be running fully organically from April this year. We've really created a team to run these different enterprises now, and so my job of setting up the foundations and getting the ball rolling is largely done in some respects. The farm shop is still under development. That's still taking a little bit more time, but we are in a position where the food sources are being created.
Yeah.
Some of the cattle now are going to be ready to slaughter later this year. The organic chickens will be coming online. The veg will be up and running again fully this year. So and there's people making all of that happen. So the role that I came here to play has been kind of largely done, and so just last week I in fact finished working for NEP in that full-time capacity, and stepping back to be more of a consultant for the project and kind of help oversee and help with any kind of decision making that might be needed going forward. But effectively it's up and running, and there's a great team of people that are going to be carrying that forward.
Let's talk a little bit about you and go back to the beginning. So you grew up in Herefordshire. Tell me a bit about your life growing up.
We have a family farm, or my parents do, and it was a lovely place to grow up, I think. And it was somewhat, now I look back now, it was somewhat isolated as rural areas are. And I suppose it wasn't until I went out into the world when I was old enough that I kind of discovered how much is out there, and particularly sort of going to university was pretty mind blowing for a rural kid. But it was very good. It was a very good upbringing, a very safe environment, and I kind of really connected with the land, I suppose, during that time. And I really had a strong interest in farming, I think, and kind of working outdoors, and that just perhaps was ingrained in me from a young age, helping out on the farm. My father kind of did arable farming, a bit of livestock, and I used to love getting involved in all of that as and when I could. But it wasn't a very big farm, so the opportunity to actually farm at home with the next generation wasn't possible, which really kind of forced my hand to think about, well, what else shall I do? And I was getting on pretty well at school academically and at college, and so somebody popped the idea into my head of being a civil engineer, and I've actually felt that would make pretty good use of my skill set and kind of ambitions to make stuff happen and build stuff. So off I went to Cardiff University, and as I said, it was pretty mind blowing.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit more about your time at Cardiff.
I met people from all around the world, which it just opened my mind up. Studying was hard but fulfilling. The socializing was even better, and I think I really kind of grew into myself a bit more then, and kind of as I discovered all of this opportunity, all these great people to meet, and it expanded my horizons. I did a master's degree with a work placement, and the work placement was very helpful. I actually did that back in Herefordshire, working for an engineering company. So I kind of had some good work experience, which really helped to get a good degree in the end. And I went back to work for that company once I graduated back in Herefordshire, and I was one of the bridge engineers in Herefordshire, looking after about 1,000 bridges in Herefordshire, kind of inspecting them annually, coordinating repair works or replacements and that sort of thing. And I really enjoyed it. But being back in Herefordshire working actually enabled me to kind of keep my links with the young farmers clubs, and so that kind of kept my hand in a little bit with farming and agriculture, which later became very useful and something I returned to.
So was young farmers the hook to sort of to go back down the agricultural line, or was there something else?
Yeah, it was definitely something else, and that really came when I'd worked for a year as a graduate, and then I decided, right, I really want to do some traveling. I'd met all these people from around the world. I wanted to go and visit them.
Yeah.
I was really inspired to go and find the next horizons and get my mind blown again. And so off I went traveling with a view to, and the company I was working for said, look, there's a job here if you want it when you get back. And I thought I'd go and see these people, have a good travel experience. And I would go and see like some bridges and some engineering projects around the world that inspired me. And I was away for nearly 10 months. I sort of tried to go around the world without flying, which didn't really work, but it was really fascinating because I did some quite long legs without flying.
Awesome.
Like I got from the UK to Istanbul, and I crossed America and Southeast Asia, did loads, on train, wow, taxi, car, all sorts. It was pretty fascinating, and a really kind of character building experience. And I kept a YouTube vlog whilst I went round, which was,
oh wow, is that still on there?
It is. Yeah, I think if you just search my name on YouTube, it comes up. I haven't actually put all the videos up yet. I keep meaning to do it, but I had some pretty interesting experiences, especially in Istanbul. But it was character building again. But I suppose the conclusion was that as I went around the world, I became more and more interested in agriculture, and that was, I wasn't looking at bridges anymore. I was actually seeking out what was going on with farming, and also particularly in Malaysia, I was just absolutely stunned by all the deforestation that was happening for palm oil. And I got back and I was like, shit, we're really, I'm not allowed to swear on the podcast.
You can.
I was like, crikey, we're really in trouble as a planet. And that this kind of exponential increase in destruction and pollution and population increases, biodiversity loss, and it was a bit of a wake up, really, that made me think, gosh, we've really got to turn this round. And so when I got back from traveling, I was like, I'm not sure that I want to be an engineer again.
Wow, that's one of those big moments in life, isn't it? Where it's sort of possible turning point.
Yeah, definitely. But the bigger moment was, I was thinking, well, as engineers, we were taught all about planning for the future and thinking about the carbon footprint of building materials. If we're building something now that's going to last 100 years, how will people be living in 100 years to maintain it and so on? So, and we thought about, like, we knew that as engineers, resources were depleting, so we were going to have to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. But because I had those farming connections through family and through young farmers, I was quite stunned, having come back from traveling, thinking, why aren't farmers talking about this? This is like pretty major, and agriculture looks to be a pretty major contributor to climate change and resource depletion, and appears pretty unsustainable as a whole, if we look at as a planet. And I was like, why is nobody doing anything about this?
So I'm going to skip a little bit ahead in the story here, then, actually, because take us to the early days of the Pasture Fed Livestock Association and how that all started.
Yeah, so off the back of my decision to do something about it, I started reaching out to different farmers and trying to get views on what we should do, what should be done. And so I started this kind of transition farming initiative in Herefordshire, which was to take the model of transition towns that are very big in urban communities, or certainly, it was 12 years ago, and they still exist now. And it's this model developed by Rob Hopkins, who lives down in Totnes, around how do you get urban communities to go from strapline is now fossil fuel dependence to local resilience. And so it's about working together as a community to make positive steps in a more sustainable direction. And I can't remember how I hooked up with it now, but I thought it was a really interesting model. And I thought, right, how could we take that into the rural communities, that idea, and into farming? And so I hosted a few different meetings with a friend of mine, Christine Hope, who runs a village shop in a remote village in Herefordshire in Longtown, and she kind of saw the other end of the supply chain, dealing with customers and consumers of food, and I was kind of coming from the farming angle, and I was saying, well, there's a lot of relevance in the supply chain between us. How can we readdress that and rethink it? And so we got these people around the table, had lots of different meetings, and there was a great enthusiasm by taking kind of positive approach, positive steps that the transition towns really foster to actually come up with lots of different solutions. And one of those was around how we actually feed our livestock and how we manage them. And this kind of really captivated me. And then those conversations kind of developed on a national level. And I met up with a very small group of farmers in Bristol who were really starting to look at how ruminant animals could be fed more sustainably, a very informal group. And I went along and was totally inspired by this group and joined them. And there were, I think it was 12 of us. And we decided together to found the Pasture Fed Livestock Association, which was to really explore what we could do as farmers to make beef and lamb production more sustainable, and how we could work together to learn from one another in a kind of positive solutions based approach, and to really be really open to ideas and research and science, and not be judgmental of other approaches to agriculture, but to go on a journey and find out. And so we started making a bit of noise, I suppose, and we held meetings at the Oxford Real Farming Conference and invited other people to come along, might be interested, and it just kind of grew and grew and grew. And very quickly we had 50 farmers in the group, and so we secured a little bit of funding. And at the time, I was helping to manage a farm in Herefordshire, and at some point we got enough money together, and we said, well, now we need somebody to kind of make this happen and run it day to day. And everybody looked at me and said, well, you're the youngest, you can do it. And that's what happened, actually. And so I started out facilitating this small group, and it just grew and grew and grew. And then we built a team, got an office, because it was all done from my kitchen table to start with, and then set up an office and expanded the network. And I think by the time I finished as general manager at the beginning of 2020, we had over 600 members, and now it's kicking on for nearly 1,000. The organisation is renamed to Pasture for Life now, which is the brand we then subsequently developed for or certification mark we developed for certifying 100% pasture fed beef, lamb and milk, and now that's been expanded to wool and leather as well. So it's really flying now, that organisation.
I mean, in many ways I find it quite mad, actually, because whether Pasture for Life or the PFLA or whatever you call it, it's it very much feels like part of the furniture. And obviously everything has to start somewhere, but it's amazing. I mean, you were there for 8 years. What, from your point of view, what are the things, those main points, markers in that time that you feel were most successful, that have made Pasture for Life what it is now?
I think a lot of it comes right back to the beginning, and the group of farmers everybody was, I would say, very humble, very interested to explore, but also realistic about the challenges ahead. And I felt they understood what I'd seen when I went traveling around the world, and they had that kind of perspective. And in particular, John Meadley was the real ringleader. We called him the sheepdog because he'd kind of get it all organised and moving in the right direction. And he'd worked in international aid and agricultural development around the world, so he had a really interesting perspective that helped us see our way through. And I think one thing he used to say a lot to us is about having faith of something being better, having faith of us succeeding, because it was very hard at times. We didn't know where the money was coming from, kind of like year 3 and 4. We got the little bit of seed funding to get started, but then what? And we were building this movement that was really challenging at times to keep going, and that was, I think, the big success is that the style and culture of that organization that was more about a movement than a than an institution.
Okay.
Institutions come and go, and people come and go, and so you lose that kind of institutional memory. But as a movement, as a community, it's a very different beast. And so it's grown steadily and organically, but I'd say grown very successfully. And but it's hard to see from the inside sometimes. And so I managed to get on Countryfile twice, I think, kind of talking about it with John Craven and then Adam Henson, and those were real markers for me, because it was like, actually we're being recognised and taken seriously, because we weren't taken seriously to start with. There were various criticisms about.
Yeah, because I mean, nothing new is it?
Well, exactly. Yeah.
It's part of the marker of being new.
Yeah, that's it. But no, really good experience, and I think my big takeaway from those years is around how to facilitate change.
Okay.
And the kind of mindset shift that takes place for farmers that realize they need to change, and that might happen. That realization might happen slowly. It might happen suddenly if there's some sort of crisis that forces their hand, and just kind of understanding the psychology of that's been really interesting to me, because I think increasingly farmers are facing the need to change and adapt, and it can look pretty uncertain. It can look pretty frightening to go out and try new methods, new techniques, which we don't necessarily know about or have the skills for, but we've got to explore things. And I enjoy helping farmers and mentoring farmers through that now immensely, and I suppose I did quite a lot of that, and helping farmers discover the opportunities for themselves in a very positive way.
Yeah, I mean, before every guest comes on, I always ask, A, if there's anything specific they want to talk about, and B, what they think sort of the biggest challenges, I suppose, that we currently face are. And one thing that you said was mindset shift. And I suppose building on what you've just said there, what do you specifically mean by that in the current context that we find ourselves in?
I think, like, take beef, for example, and how to graze them. Traditionally, or in fact, lots of farmers would put their animals out into fields and let them graze in a field for a few weeks, and then maybe move them to the next field, or leave them out in the field all summer and then bring them into the barns at winter. I mean, not everyone's doing that now, but certainly in the norm, and it's still going on a lot. And then what I've been doing is moving those animals every day to a fresh paddock, and I've been putting up electric fencing. To a lot of people, that looks like a lot of work.
Yeah.
And this is madness, because you're spending time, labor costs are expensive, and why would you do that? And I get it asked on every farm tour I've done it now, and it gets we all get, those of us doing it, we all get asked about it a lot. But then it's about thinking, well, how the mindset shift is actually understanding how those grazing herbivores are interacting with the grassland ecosystem, as they do in the wild, in the Great Grassland Plains or the Serengeti or Great Plains in North America, where there's a symbiotic relationship between grazing herbivores and grass plants and the way that they interact. And that's about being partially grazed, but also then rested, dung and urine from the animals onto the pasture, exciting the soil biology. And I'm really kind of abbreviating it all, but it's a bit to get your head around. And then the other aspect is actually, well, if moving those animals on a daily basis, you can then extend your grazing season from 6 months to 9 months. And I did that here. We at NEP, we've been housing the cattle just for short winter. But by reducing your winter housing costs in half is really significant. And it makes that extra bit of time each day really worth it. And I suppose it's getting your head around that holistically and thinking about, well, this is how the animals are interacting with the pasture, and I'm getting the best of my land by helping the soil to work well and farming the soil life as much as anything, and then thinking about the impact on costs. What happens with the mindset shift is that people are used to their comfort zones and what they know works in a particular way. When that's challenged, either through a crisis or, like, for example, the withdrawal of BPS payments, that's actually causing people to think, right, we need to really rethink our business models. There's I think a a process, a kind of psychological process that looks a little bit like the Kubler-Ross model for dealing with grief.
Okay.
And just to kind of explain that, the Kubler-Ross model kind of shows how people's morale drops when a change comes along. So people are quite happy with where they're at, in their comfort zone, and then something triggers a change, and then there'll be some resistance and defense to saying, this change isn't for me. I'm not getting involved in this. And then the circumstances continue, and they're still putting up resistance, but the morale is kind of dropping and saying, no, we don't want to do this. Can't entertain it. It's not for us. And at some point, then there's a tipping point where they're like, well, maybe we've got no other option, or maybe we should do something along these lines, or maybe we should change the way we're doing things. And then that mindset shift has started to happen, and the morale starts to pick up again, and they can then say, well, maybe we should explore this. What are these ideas? Start understanding more, taking first steps forward, and then thinking, actually, no, this could be okay. This could work. And over time, kind of building back up to essentially to a new normal, a new comfort zone, where they're then, okay, yeah, this is a step worth taking. We're happy with the change we've made. But then that will change as well, and this kind of change process is quite continuous. And so the Kubler-Ross model dealing with grief is more about, I can't believe what's happened. I've lost somebody. I'm not accepting it, to kind of acceptance, and then saying, well, life moves on, and how does it look? And it's kind of a simple bell-shaped curve, or inverted bell shape. And I think that the Kubler-Ross model that was I was explaining to someone else, they said I should call it the Kubler-Russ model for farming and mindset shift, is actually a series of up and down curves where we're constantly on this journey of discovery and fear, but also exploration, and finding what works, making positive steps forward. And at some point, it's amazing what we can achieve in a short space of time when we prioritize and put our minds to things. And I've had chance the last 2 years to really put that into practice, and to say, right, here's a blank canvas of a farm that's got poor infrastructure, a limited budget. How do we change something in a short period of time as fast as possible? And when we set out, I don't know whether I would have expected us to achieve so much in 2 years, but looking back now, it's quite, I'm really proud of what's been achieved 2 years, and it just shows it can be done.
Exactly. I think it's the point as well, isn't it? That point on the pace of change as well, is that it is all about action. For me, the most exciting work is always done on that fringe of when you're just about working to your edge. If you're not pushing yourself, if you're not uncomfortable, then really you're not learning, you're not moving forward. So sometimes we all have to just look at ourselves, I think, and just think, how can I push myself just that little bit more? Let's return to the narrative. And when you were with the PFLA, you were also heavily involved as a volunteer with an organisation called Rural Youth Europe. Tell us a little bit more about them.
So Rural Youth Europe is an umbrella organisation that brings together young farmer networks, or rural youth networks, from all across Europe. So, for example, the National Federation of Young Farmers Clubs in England and Wales is a member of Rural Youth Europe. And Rural Youth Europe was set up in 1957 to essentially encourage intercultural exchange between rural youth organisations right across the continent, and it's been very successful all those years in doing that, and actually creating events where groups of people from each of the member organisations come together and they learn about a topic together. They go on farm tours, they meet interesting rural businesses. And it's kind of a personal development experience for people, as much as anything, and kind of strengthening relationships across Europe in a rural youth sector. But I suppose the other interesting thing is that, and increasingly in the last few years since I've been involved, trying to give more of a voice to rural youth communities on a European level, particularly through the kind of Council of Europe and the Youth Forum. And that's been very worthwhile, in fact, and actually trying to engender equal rights for rural and urban people. And that might come as a surprise, but actually it's been interesting in those discussions that there is often a divide between urban and rural youth. What we should be doing is think of us all as youth and from different backgrounds, but actually those different perspectives can mean that not everybody has the same opportunities.
Yeah, and you're also a steering group member of the Rural Youth Project here in the UK, which Jane Craigie founded fairly recently. And of course, you've got your young farmers background. Perhaps let's just reflect for a bit on, I suppose, that idea about youth leadership and what the potential for that is, what the role of youth leadership is within wider frameworks. So, I mean, why is it, that's a fairly standard question, but why is it important to profile youth voices, I suppose, and how do you encourage that voice to amplify?
Being involved in Rural Youth Europe really kind of honed my interest and honed for me, or pointed out to me, how important the youth voice is, and also how important youth are to creating the changes in land management, in rural economies, how important they really are to make that happen and to make the action happen that we need. I suppose that's why I've got involved in these different projects that help facilitate that, because I suppose what I'm finding is that particularly people in their kind of late teens, they've grown up in a world where it's been a bit doom and gloom. They've been born into a world where the planet's in trouble. There are lots of problems around the world, and increasingly that age group is kind of suffering from eco anxiety.
Yeah.
And they're often not sure what to do about it. And I think it's really important to hear those voices and understand, why they feel like that, but then also to help facilitate them being able to take action and move forward and make positive steps and repair damage from the past and so on. If we can do that well and help not give the answers to young people, but help facilitate them to create their own solutions, I think that will be essential to saving the planet, really.
Gosh, there are so many other directions we can take this conversation, but I suppose I'm also conscious of time and your time. But I just want to reflect, I suppose, before we go on that idea of change. And actually, listeners, if you're interested, over on the Rural Business Focus podcast, an early episode of that, I had Matt Swain on, and we reflected a lot on that subject. So yeah, go over and listen to that if you want to go into more depth. But yeah, so the idea of change in itself and the ups and downs of either starting something new, or changing a farming business. It doesn't need to be a farming business; it could be any business. It could be anything in your life. But from your point of view, is there anything that we can do to prepare ourselves or prepare anyone else for going through those experiences? And I speak as someone who has gone through personally quite a lot of change in the last year as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Ben. I think it starts with kind of self and understanding yourself, but also being disciplined in yourself to set goals and to make a plan, but do it from a point where you are present and mindful and not emotionally influenced by other people's thoughts or other perceptions. And I think a tool in this is kind of mindfulness and meditation. And I'm a big fan of that. And I think it's really important to know ourselves and know where we're going or where we want to go. I suppose I've been lucky to have a few experiences kind of traveling, where I spent a lot of time by myself, and I've been inspired by traveling. That certainly kind of helps my mind space and helps me get clarity on what it is that needs to be done or what it is that I want to do. I think it's really important for whatever you're doing, whether it's farming or some other business, to really be very present and to be rational and logical about our decision making and not get too hung up in perceptions and emotions.
You said you want to do some travel in the next year. Where's on your bucket list?
Well, I've been really lucky to make a lot of contacts around Europe through my Rural Youth Europe work, and I'm really keen to kind of keep up a lot of those contacts, but also in the UK as well. And I want to go and see Scotland some more.
Brilliant.
And get outdoors and take a bit of a break. And I think that's an important part of the change process is actually having some rest It's been very full on the last couple of years, setting up the farm here at Nep. And so, I recognize that I'm ready for that period of rest to recharge, recuperate, and to come up with the new ideas of what's next and where I want to focus my efforts and energies and skills in the future.
Well, Russ, I think it's seriously anyone who's either listened to this and come across you for the first time or known of all your work in the past it is seriously impressive what you've done. And I think that we are incredibly lucky as an agricultural world to have you in it. So thank you, but I'm not going to let you go yet because I'm going to ask you the two questions that we ask everyone at the end of the show. The first is, Russ Carrington, if you have a message for the public, any message, what would it be?
Go and meet a farmer. Go and ask them about how they produce their food. Understand the challenges that they face. Get to know a farmer.
And a message for farmers.
Don't be afraid of change. Embrace it. But you're not alone. There's a whole community of people out there that are on this journey as well, and they can be of great assistance.
Brilliant. And finally, any recommendation you have for a farming related blog, podcast, or social media account to follow?
Am I allowed a non-farming recommendation?
Yeah, of course.
Well, I definitely recommend Diary of a CEO by Stephen Bartlett.
Yeah, of course.
And really good one for just making you think about all the leadership things, decision making, time management, which is so relevant to agriculture.
Yeah. Did you listen to his Richard Branson one?
No, I haven't. No.
That's definitely worth.
Right, I'll seek that one out.
Yeah, do it. But no, honestly, Russ, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a real pleasure, and just really interesting going back and actually just having some time to reflect on both where you've come from, but also just a little bit on where organizations like Pasture for Life have come from as well. So thank you and good luck. I know that whatever you do next, whatever you end up doing next, you will smash it. So well done, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you very much.
That is it for today. Thank you very much for listening. If you haven't already, please do like and subscribe to the show wherever you're listening, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Next week, I will be in Lincolnshire with Jen Braithwaite. And on the Rural Business Focus podcast this week, I'm with Millie Fife again, and we're talking about branding. I'm Ben Eagle. This has been Meet the Farmers. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you all have a great week.